By now you'll have heard some stories which will give you a flavour of Pat's life, but I wonder if by themselves those stories actually capture two of the traits, two of the characteristics he had of which I was most appreciative and somewhat envious, particularly his great zest for life, his love of life, and his ability to tell a story. Now, when you tell a story, it always helps. It's a great starting point to have the treasure trove of material that Pat had, and you'll be hearing a number of those stories today. But nevertheless, there's also remains a skill in telling the story. You need to understand who your audience is and to draw them in. And for me, this was beautifully illustrated 4 or 5 years ago when Pat and Nikki were staying with Sharon and I in Sydney. Pat would have been probably around 80 then. I'd been to the pub with a bunch of the guys, had a lovely evening and wanted to carry on when it was closing time. So as our place was just around the corner from the pub, I suggested that they come back for a couple more drinks, which they readily did. So we rolled in, half a dozen guys, slightly tipsy, 11:30 of an evening. Now, Pat's always been an early riser rather than a night owl, but nevertheless he was persuaded to join us for a couple of drinks. And then the fun began. And for me it was so revealing. There were a couple of guys who fancied themselves as Jack the Lad characters, and we were, as I said, we'd had a decent sup. So they were somewhat beer boisterous, and it was truly revealing to see them change from beer boisterous blokes to school children on the edge of their seat, asking Pat to tell us another yarn. And a further example of that was he was battling with emphysema then, and even managed to turn that to his advantage by pausing at a particularly dramatic incident in the story that he was telling to draw a deep breath and carry on. So, as I say, these guys were transformed from not knowing who this old guy is and probably not really wanting to go and have a drink with my father-in-law to enthusiastically endorsing the idea, Pat, you really should turn this into a memoir. And we even came up with what I think was an excellent working title, and which will now, I think, make a fitting epitaph. So I'd like you to raise your glass or offer a prayer if that's your preference, to Pat O'Connell and a life lived large. Cheers, Pat.